In Illinois, there's only 270 employee-owned companies. In the United States, there's only 6,900 employee-owned companies. At the biggest level, from a vision and mission standpoint, I want to get really good at it and then start incentivizing other companies to follow our path. It has nothing to do with technology, but that's going to be an arm in the future that I can see for the business of training and guiding and educating people along the way so that they can get there. That's how you impact the income inequality gap in the United States. And it's like, we've got to start fixing this, because this is the way out of the problem, not the other way around. In private equity, they're beholden to their shareholders, right? And when I hear that, it's like, okay, so private equity's goal is for money to make more money, not to advance community, not to help people, not to elevate people out of poverty. It's to make people who already have enough money more money, so that it can be even more concentrated and the gap widens.
Welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, Jean Moncrief, and my guest this week is Eric Rieger. Now, Eric is the founder and CEO of WEBIT Services. They are a certified employee-owned technology company, but they aren't just your run-of-the-mill tech company. Eric has woven his sense of purpose into WEBIT and dedicated the business to bridging the gap between purpose and profit. In our conversation, Eric shares his entrepreneurial journey from very humble beginnings, making t-shirts and working inside another company, which ultimately this culture that was kind of family-like in this company goes toxic. And Eric thinks to himself, well, he could do this better. So he sets off to set up WEBIT Services, and he decides to go it alone to build a more purpose-driven business with a very bold mission to tackle income inequality. In this episode, we talk about the challenges of building an employee-owned company. We talk about the importance of visionary leadership, and we talk about exit options. Like most businesses, Eric has built something that is successful, and private equity is knocking on the door. But Eric isn't interested in taking that pile of cash. He's not interested in an infinite game or an infinite number of games of golf or buying cars or investing in other businesses. What Eric is really interested in is helping the people who helped him to get to where he is right now. And that's his employees. So when he set off to create an employee-owned business, he basically had his employees' best interests at heart, giving back to those folks. I think what I loved most about this conversation with Eric is this idea that WEBIT Services is a beacon for other businesses. It's a beacon for Eric's suppliers, Eric's partners, for the people around in that community who get to know WEBIT Services. And when I close my eyes, I imagine other businesses around this world, businesses for good, that act as beacons to attract other companies into the way of doing business that they do, to make a difference in the world and to change the world and some of the tough things that we're facing at the moment. In our conversation, Eric doesn't hold back. He really bears his soul. I loved making this with him, and I really hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
All right, Eric, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for coming on. Really appreciate having you here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, me too. I've been waiting for this one for quite a while. So why don't we start and just kind of give us a little bit of background? As we were saying earlier, I know you come from sort of going from making T-shirts to putting together a tech business, but what's your entrepreneurial journey been?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. I think that's a Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. I've certainly looked up to that. When I was younger, a friend of mine and we were just kind of sitting around, and his dad had a T-shirt business. He was a police officer. My friend, his son, was also a police officer. And they would do these things for people in the community kind of on the side. And pretty much everything he did lost money. but he had a big heart, right? He was just a community guy, and he would just do anything for anybody. And that was like our common bond, is my father was the same way. And between the two of them, they were kind of always neck and neck for like worst business person on the planet in terms of entrepreneurial decisions. And I kind of just inserted myself into that situation and started trying to organize things and help out and make it better. And then it just kind of morphed into this thing where we were doing t-shirts and whatnot. And my buddy didn't really have that bug to be like a business person. So now here I was doing this stuff, but I also had a job and I was in tech. And I had people coming to me on the side asking me to help them in their businesses. So I got a full-time job and I'm doing this kind of side work. And part of it was just a laziness of, I didn't want to have to track my hours. So I started saying, well, here, if I charge you X per month, then just call me when you need me. And so like, I didn't have an inkling to try and do this, but it just started happening. And then I got fed up at my job, and it was just stress and 90 hours a week on top of everything else. And I had a conversation with my dad, and this is the wisdom of somebody who went bankrupt and had a failed business. And he goes, you got a credit card, just start your own business. Yep. And just go in and quit and go, yeah, that makes total sense. And it worked out, but like, I would not advise any listeners to follow that path, because that's 99.9% of the time it does not end in the way my story has.
Recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So you're making t-shirts, you've got a full-time job. Do you move to carry on making t-shirts, or you're going into something else at this point? What was, when your dad said, take your credit card and go and do your thing, what was that?
Yeah, well, when one of the first things you learn when you quit your job and you don't really have a lot saved up is you'll do whatever you have to do to survive. So it was a lot of both in the early days. And fortunately for me, when I left my job at the software company, the first person I hired over there, he wanted to leave probably 6 months after, like things were just starting to fall apart. And so he became the first employee before we really had a plan. And then fortunately, that company I left hired us both back as consultants. So that was kind of our first big client per se. Okay. And it just kind of lucked into some of that stuff early on. And then some of the software I wrote at that company, they refused to support it. So the company I wrote it for called me and said, hey, they won't support it. Will you? And again, you're trying to do anything to survive. You're like, sure, I'll do whatever I have to do. It takes whatever. Yeah, well, it's the whatever it takes mentality. But those, because I treated people right early on, those opportunities were a result of doing right by people. I think that's the kind of the key thing that helped me get through those early years was, before I discovered core values and things like that, it's just, that was what my dad instilled in me the most was, you always, the right tool for the right job, and don't half-ass anything. If you're going to go in, go all in, and always put people first. Like he never put himself above anybody else. He was always doing, and so you get those kind of things, and that becomes who you are. And it just set us up for success along the way in terms of treating people right.
So what was going on at the company that made you leave? Were there culture issues? I mean, it must have been quite something that was going on to make you to actually take that step and put your credit card down without a plan and just go forward.
This is another life lesson that, again, they're all over the place. And if you're paying attention, you can learn a lot of things even from failure. That's to me, the best teacher that there is. And when I joined the company, I think it was like the 8th person to join the company. And then we had some success and we started growing, and we grew from like 8 to 80 people. But along the way, the person who owned the company went through some personal issues, a nasty divorce, and it changed him. Like he was the first person in, the last person to leave. Set a great example. We had kind of a family culture. You're not supposed to have a business and family like that. But we pulled for each other, and then it all of a sudden became about money, prestige, and power. Like the things that made us special all of a sudden got put by the wayside. Then it was revenge and power and money and Mercedes and houses and stuff like that. So we got tasked with a lot more work and titles, but no compensation. And it just got ugly. We treated our employees terrible. We treated our clients terrible. It was a bunch of factions inside the company fighting with one another. It just didn't make sense anymore. We lost track of our soul, who we were, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and they weren't going to change. So, there really wasn't an option. Like, I was going to leave one way or another. But it was the push from my dad. It's like, well, instead of going out and getting another job, you seem to have it figured out what you want. Go just do that. Go make your own utopia.
Was that the genesis of WEBIT?
Yeah.
So that's where it started. And that was 30 years ago now?
It's 29 years.
29 years.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a long time.
Like, you get rewarded with the gray when that happens. And you keep your hair, it turns a nice shade of gray or Snow White if you're lucky.
So how did you kind of grow this business up over the years?
Accidentally, with a lot of the initial, like, I never had a plan. This is the whole, going back to what we were talking about before we started, is planning is not my strong suit. Like, I'm a visionary through and through, and I'm a big picture 10-year out. Like, here's the utopia I see. And then all the details that follow, not my strong suit. So I was fortunate enough that, and again, I think this is part of, you make your own luck by how you treat people and how the energy you put out into the world. Is I was fortunate enough to have, I can kind of pinpoint key moments in my life in business where the right person was introduced into my life to help me get to the next level that I needed at that time. So there's been like a litany of people. I just did a LinkedIn post trying to tag as many people as I could think of along the way of, like,
I noticed that. That was brilliant. Well, yeah.
Looked on it, and I was like, man, oh man, all the twists and turns that could have gone either way. And then these people just show up, but it's kind of because you put it out in the universe, and it's funny. They just appear because of, who you know and and if you're your authentic self, I think that resonates with other people who are like that, and people who are kind of ahead of the game. They'll guide you into that next level. And that's always been kind of just how things have operated for me. Again, it's accidental, but kind of on purpose because of the intention.
And so you have a vision. You're thinking in 10 years, you start the business. Are you all over the place?
Yeah.
Is there somebody who's helping you there at the beginning, or what are things looking like?
No, I drove a lot of people. I mean, still to this day, I drive people crazy. It's a gift that's hard to harness. So there's a lot of work I do on myself trying to figure out how to harness this crazy brain that I have. But like the one of the problems, and this is very true for a lot of entrepreneurs I've talked to, is that we're so hungry for knowledge and we're so curious that we're out there, like, we're easy to market to because we'll bite on anything that even remotely makes sense. And so we go to a lot of conferences and we get involved with a lot of people who are, trying to help move your business forward. And then you come back every 2-3 weeks with the new crazy idea. And if there's nobody to kind of keep it in check, everybody just starts tuning you out, and they just sit there and they're like, okay, if we can just ride out the next 2 weeks, he'll forget about it, move on to something else, and just get to work. So that was there's still some of that I bring to the table today, but, fortunately we're a little bit more grown up and have more guardrails in place to keep that from happening as much. But that's just, I truly believe anything can be accomplished. And again, that's where you need protection, because people like me are easy to market to because we believe everything's possible.
Yeah. I remember that myself, document storage business, imaging business, but hey, these serviced offices are going to be a thing. Let's start up a serviced office business. Let's start a recruitment business instead of going to a recruiter. And these sort of businesses popped up everywhere. But you had a really interesting way of dealing with that. If I recall, kind of writing it in a diary or something, or book, and your integrator taking a look at it. And if it wasn't there after, was it a month or so, then it wasn't an idea to pursue. How did that work? Have I got it right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some, that's a pretty concise version of it. So, again, this was with the previous integrator that, we wound up parting ways because there was some other stuff happening there. But to try and control it, what we would do is create a folder on the network where I would just dump all my crazy ideas into that. And then the process was he was supposed to review it.
Okay.
See if anything resonated in terms of what was happening and how it would fit into the business. And then monthly, when we'd have our meeting, if I was still excited about something, we'd kind of dive more into it, because that's the thing with people like me. It's like, we're excited about everything for a small period of time, and then we're on to the next thing. But the true test is kind of like, are you still excited about it 2 weeks later, 2 months later? Because those are the ones you kind of want to latch onto a little bit more, because they have more roots inside you. Because we can come up with all kind. I mean, that's the thing. It's not hard to start a business. It's not hard to say you're going to change the world. What's really hard is to actually put it all together and execute.
Yeah.
And that's where, you can have a million crazy ideas, and vast majority of them are not going to come to fruition. It's just the reality.
So is there a point where you start looking at a system where, planning wasn't a big thing, but where you actually start looking at how do we systematize our growth, or what are we doing?
That's always been my challenge, is to have people around who can help with the systemization of it. And, the more afflicted you are with my type of visioning, the type of things you see, the faster you want to go. And that's not always a good thing. So we adopted EOS, probably about 4-ish years ago. So that's kind of the guardrail framework we're very much trying to stick to. So there's a part where I can just be me, but the business still needs 90-day goal, 90 day time frames, and then a 1 year, a 3 year, 5 year, a 10 year. That's, it's trying to harness the visionary power and then give direction to the employee, because the employees don't want to hear every day about 10 years from your, when they're in the muck every day. Then it's like, great, you go off and tell me where we're going to be in 10 years and how great it's going to be. I got to go give support to a client right now.
You need to find that balance. So there's the pull towards the 10 years, but there's what needs to be done right now and the priorities that need to be kind of focused on right now.
And it's something with, from a guardrail perspective of, there's only so much information that's good for me to have on a short-term basis, because if you give me a problem, I'm going to try to solve it. And that's not necessarily good for me or the business, right? There's certain smaller things that I don't need to be part of, right? That's where building the structure, I look at a business this way. There's 4 key pillars in any business. I don't care what you're doing, what you're in. It starts with people, and then you've got operations, finance, and sales. Those are your 4 pillars. Every one of them has to be aligned and moving forward at kind of the same speed. And I always look at people and sales as kind of the same function, just with a different objective. The people part is, from a recruiting and human resources standpoint, you want to find the best, you want to build a pipeline, you always want to be ready for growth. Sales is the same way. You're just looking for companies instead of employees.
Yeah.
But it's the same type of thing. It's if you bring a bad fit client in, it's going to have chaotic circumstance. You bring a bad fit employee, and it's not that there's bad people. That's a big distinction, is not everybody's right for every business, and you got to know who you are, and you got to know your DNA. And people I hear this term, we need culture fits. And it's well, we don't want to have a bunch of people all just like us, culture enhancements. That's what you're looking for, is, this is the big, hairy, audacious goal. Where are we, kind of weak, and who could come in and fit into that, the structure and help us evolve. So like that's kind of how, you're seeing it come out here just in this conversation, like how I look at the world and how now somebody's got to take that and go actually find the people, make sure you've got a solid structure in place financially, make sure operationally all the promises sales are making are being delivered. I mean, this is why companies fail. It's really, really hard to keep all that just on a day-to-day and then move forward.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
So it's more about cultural diversity and than cultural fit, so to speak. Or
right.
I mean, culture is a living thing, isn't it? It's kind of like a living.
Yeah. Well, it's like taking a look at our company. Like my big picture thing for the company is we're employee owned, and in Illinois there's only 270 employee owned companies. In the United States there's only 6,900 employee owned companies. At the biggest level, from a vision and mission standpoint, I want to get really good at it and then start incentivizing other companies to follow our path. It has nothing to do with technology, but that's going to be an arm in the future that I can see for the business of training and guiding and educating people along the way so that they can get there. That's how you impact the income inequality gap in the United States. That's the big, hairy, audacious goal, is to reduce that. And you've got to have a whole bunch of different kinds of people in an organization, but they're all committed to that big goal. If they're all like me, you'll never get anything done. Like, am I a good part for the culture? Well, I lead, I'm trying to give everybody a direction to march toward. But if you had like everybody in every seat wired like me, nothing would ever get done. We just have how great the future is going to be.
Ideas coming out everywhere.
Yeah. So you can't look for a certain, they've got to align their core values have to align with where what the big, hairy, audacious goal is. Outside of that, then you need a very diverse pool of skill sets and personalities. And, you don't want just a bunch of, Android robots out there just taking orders.
Is that why, that purpose? And I know this has been a big thing for you, of kind of being that beacon for other organizations, for your customers, for your clients, to sort of shrink the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Is that something that's the overall purpose of why for WEBIT as well? Or is that sort of a personal core purpose?
It's both. I mean, it's hard to separate that. Like, I can't have this other mission that I'm dedicated and then be really committed to something that's not aligned with that. So for me, the income inequality gap is at the root of a lot of the problems this country has. Like, if, there's been talk about universal basic incomes, and I'm a huge fan and believer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you look at the work Abraham Maslow did in his lifetime, it's like that should be the central thesis for just about every business course. If your employees, if you look at the triangle, the base of the triangle, food, shelter, water, like, can I survive today?
Yeah.
If you've got employees that are struggling at that level, and you're trying to get them to a purpose up here at the top of self-actualization and self-realization, if you're worried if you're not going to be able to eat, or if you don't have a place to live, or if you're not going to make it to the next paycheck, you don't care about any of that stuff. It's survival. Yeah. So all of this stuff has to be taken into context of Maslow's hierarchy of needs of, we've got to elevate people up here. Well, if you've got this gap of, 4 people on the planet have like half of the wealth. Well, of course, you're going to have a segment of the population that has almost nothing because it's being hoarded by all these other people. That's the big question, is how much is enough? And I've had so many late night conversations with people in our circles of like, how do you, in a capitalist society, how do you define where is enough before you start getting labeled a communist or a socialist or stuff that people don't even know what the true meanings are. It's like capitalism or bust. And it's like, well, there's a lot of flaws in that system that have gotten us to the point where you now have a lot of gaps in the haves and the have-nots. And that creates a lot of this unrest and the problems that we face as a society.
And that keeps growing. And I love the way you you described that, again, coming from South Africa and having a business where, a lot of the folks who worked with us, just having a roof over their head was getting food. There were real issues, getting to work, getting from work. And I think it's the way you kind of laid that out now is just so important. We often don't think about some of those challenges. And unless we can help people overcome those challenges, there's no use talking about that bigger, greater sort of purpose.
Well, there's a story that's unfortunately headlines in the news right now. The CEO of United Healthcare was murdered right before the shareholder meeting. And all indications, like, I'm not a detective, but like, if you look at the reports that are coming out, the bullets were carved up with a message from a book. And my intuition tells me, just and this is not anything special. I mean, everybody reading the story, probably piecing it together. Whoever did this lost somebody because their coverage was denied or something like that. And this is payback. Yeah. And this is what happens when a basic human right, it should be healthcare. And healthcare is a for-profit industry in the United States. And so right after this happened, Anthem Blue Cross came out literally the next day and said, in 3 states now, we're going to put a cap on how much anesthesia we'll pay for. And it's like, you want to talk about a tone-deaf organization with the wrong message at the wrong time. The CEO of United Healthcare just got murdered on the street, probably because of something, and they made $16 billion in profit.
Yeah.
And somebody likely lost somebody they loved because of this. And now you're going to come out and double down, and you're a different insurer and go, well, we're going to cap how much anesthesia you're allowed to have. Insurance companies should not be dictating what happens in an operating room or a doctor's office. I don't have the answer to this, but if we don't start looking at how to solve these basic human problems, you've got people in the United States who are up to their eyeballs in debt because of college and because of health problems, right? Yeah. So our education system is a mess. You've got college football teams paying coaches for college teams paying their football coaches $20 million a year and charging students like, 50, 60 grand per semester to learn, a degree that's going to get them a $30,000 or $40,000 job. It's math. How do you not see that as a basic problem that we have in the United States? And these are all the things I'm fighting for. The employee matters. The employee's health matters, physical and mental. And if we don't start this is what happens. You put people in desperate situations. There's a portion of the population that's going to crack, and this is going to be, unfortunately, the norm. I'm trying to fight against all this. It's like, we got to elevate people up that pyramid.
And your way of doing that is you get to that point where the business is now valuable, it's worth something, and you're getting offers from private equity. Your decision is, I don't need to spend the time on a golf course, buy a private island, whatever it is. I'm going to help the people who've helped me to build this business and give back to them, right?
Absolutely. The private equity, like I've spoken out, my opinions are well known online about private equity. And I just did a talk with Carcass Capitalism Chicago about this. And, it's really not easy to become an employee-owned organization. Like the laws, like you're basically following ERISA laws. And then the people who help put out ESOP plans, the ESOP advisors, they don't have great spokespeople, and they're basically saying, well, this is just like a 401k plan. And it's not. It's like absolutely rooted in purpose. And so you have poor spokespeople, you have laws that don't make it easy for businesses. Business owners are like inundated with all these problems in general, and you're making it harder for them to do right for their people. And it's like, we've got to start fixing this, because this is the way out of the problem, not the other way around. In private equity, they're beholden to their shareholders, right? Like when I hear that, okay, so private equity's goal is for money to make more money, not to advance community, not to help people, not to elevate people out of poverty. It's to make people who already have enough money more money. so that it can be even more concentrated and the gap widens. So I'm diametrically opposed to what they stand for. And I published an article a couple of years ago when we first became employee owned saying, here's why we did this. And literally the next day I got a LinkedIn message from somebody saying, hey, I read your article. How can private equity participate? And I wrote back, I'm like, you must have stopped halfway through because you probably didn't read the last part where I basically slammed private equity as kind of the catalyst of why I'm going in this direction. You can't participate because I'm trying to make it so you don't exist.
It just shows how much people actually read the articles, doesn't it?
That's bizarre. That's
yeah.
People, it's real easy for people to say, oh, I'm purpose driven too. And it's like, okay, when somebody puts a $10 million check in front of you, what do you say? And we had this conversation at Small Giants with Bo. It's like,
Yes.
somebody asked me in the audience, like, well, what's your number? As if like I've got this number inside, well, you can buy my values for X. And it just doesn't work that way. If you're truly committed to purpose and helping people, it's like there isn't a number, because I would just take that money and start another business and just start doing the same thing all over again. And why would I put myself through that when I've already on the path?
So I'm keen to go back to what you were saying about ESOPs, and what are some of the big challenges that you've seen? How long has this been now? 5 years since you started, or since you put the scheme?
Well, 2016 is when I got introduced to open book finance. So
right.
Started, and companies who do that tend to go down that path towards employee ownership if the open book was kind of purpose driven. So that path from 2016 to 2022 is when we finally pulled the trigger and the paperwork was signed and shares were handed out. Like, it took 6 years from that to that, because there was a lot of learning, and I still have a lot of learning to do. And one of the things I learned last year was, once I'm no longer the majority shareholder, there's literally nothing stopping private equity from coming in and making an offer to the board at WEBIT that's a ridiculously stupid offer that nobody else would make or match, just to get the company out of the hands of, and sure, the employees would do well in that scenario, but it stops the evergreen motion. It just creates one small group of people who are okay, well off, but then it doesn't keep that going. It doesn't start to shrink the gap. And then it gives another company in the hands of private equity, which that just blew my mind that I didn't see that hole early on. And so now we have to figure out how to put a poison pill into the trust so that they won't come after us once I'm no longer the majority shareholder.
Is that something you do with the trustees, where you work together to put that poison pill in? Or is it still at the stage where you have enough control yourself to do that?
Well, there's a thing called the Perpetual Purpose Trust that I learned about through Zingerman's and the work
Brad Herman.
Yeah, and that's what Vextamol, that's what they did. So we're gonna look at going down that path before there's a change in the majority ownership. Like right now, I still have a majority share, because the one thing with employee ownership you got to be careful with is you don't want to overburden the company with debt. Like, I didn't do it as a liquidity event. I didn't do it for the money. So we're very cautiously offloading the debt in small increments. But like, there'll come a time when I'm no longer 50% or more, or 51% or more majority shareholder. And that's when now I can be fired just like anybody else. And it's like, okay, we got to be careful at that stage that it's really in your DNA and the evergreen and everything is all moving forward, so that it's when the next generation changes hands, it's like it's still following that path.
So you're actually thinking of kind of potentially winding the ESOP back and going toward an employee perpetual trust instead?
Yeah, it's just how the trust is structured, because like right now in our ESOP model, like the employees don't own shares of the business, they own shares of the trust. And then they can only sell them back to the trust when they leave or retire. So the model's already there. It's basically putting a poison pill into the trust that makes it not desirable.
Okay, gotcha. I want to go back right to the beginning where we talked about the company that you worked for originally and the owner who went through originally you were kind of a family, and then he goes through a divorce, and that changes him. But I feel like in the conversations I've listened to you, you kind of had a trigger that sent you the other way. So I remember you talking about being kind of meltdown Eric, and now becoming calm Eric. What was that transformation for you?
Yeah, calm Eric is a relative term on any given day, but like I would actually characterize it as more of an unaware Eric and a now an aware Eric. So like on any given day, I'm still fighting the demons in my head and all that stuff, but I'm at least aware of the root of it. So my origin story from that perspective was, we talked about my dad being like really the pillar of my life and really where a lot of these characteristics came from. Well, when he passed in 2013, he basically had like 31 cents in his checking account or 33 cents, whatever it was. And a bunch of crap that he had forged my name on that I did not know about that I now inherited, and all the bills. So I basically now had 2 mortgages, 2 car payments because I had to care for my mom. And, like without getting into too much of the details, like she's a 180 of him and a very classic narcissist. The universe revolves around her, very much, falls unrestored. It's always my fault and, that kind of thing. And it after years of that and trying to grow a business, I had basically like a nervous breakdown for all intents and purposes. And I had fortunate to have a good coach who gently kept pushing me towards therapy. And I resisted for a while because I'm a Gen Xer and growing up, that stuff was, you rub dirt on it.
Yeah.
Men don't talk about their feelings and that kind of stuff. You push it down. And my dad was pretty much the same way. It's like we never talked about feelings or issues. And so I got to a point where I never got suicidal, but I just hoped I didn't wake up the next day because I just couldn't deal with all the pain and the trauma. And that's what therapy helped me start figuring out was the origins of my trauma came from childhood and dealing with it. And then I was forced at some point to confront my mother of whether or not you want to be part of my life in a way that's not going to put me in the ground. And she didn't. And she went out and found somebody to marry right away and just hopped to another rock. And it was fine because it was self-preservation, but also the realization of like, hey, I'm working on me. That's all I can do is once you're aware of the trauma, now you're accountable for your actions. Like, and with other people, I couldn't control that, but now I'm aware of the results of that. Now I'm accountable to myself and to others for my behavior. And so I've been in therapy. I've had dozens of therapists at this point. Now I'm working with Dr. Brackman that we talked about, which is really trying to hone in on the gifts that I have, but also healing the trauma from the past. And I would, again, talking about having the right people in your corner at the right times. I just don't think my former boss had anybody other than the people who were like, well, if she's coming after your company, it's the only thing that matters to you. You really got to stick it to her. And it's now you should have this power and prestige and this money and you work really hard. And it's the same line a lot of people get fed. It's like, hey, you put a lot on the line. Most small business owners sacrifice so much.
Yeah.
And so people kind of lump them in with these big CEOs that you see getting 10, 20, $30 million a year. Well, that's a very small minority. Most small businesses are under $1 million, and these people are working crazy hours and giving up so much of their lives. Don't lump them in with the bad people, but they need help and support to deal with because the trauma will show up in your life and your business if you don't deal with it. So like I was, again, I've had so many fortunate tracks in my life where people have just been there at the right time to help guide me. And it's still a work. I kind of liken it to, the Alcoholics Anonymous thing. It's like once you're an alcoholic for life. So like in my case, like my brain's not going to change. I have to learn how to control that. And it's a battle every day with your, healing your trauma, finding the peace, being your best self. But like, if you just take your foot off the gas and just try to coast, your default nature will take over. And we are chaotic people who are wired for destruction if we're not kept in a lane.
Going back to what you said about Gen X, Gen X as well. And you're right, being vulnerable and talking about therapy and those kind of things is something that I think the majority of us find very difficult and are not kind of up for going to therapy sessions. And I mean, one of the things, or there's, I guess, three things I've noticed about you. One, you're very self-aware, lifelong learner, number two. And I think while you might not have a plan, you definitely take action. So it's easy to look back at all the connected dots. But it sounds like you got these three real strengths that have kind of been in your corner along the way.
Well, that's the benefit of having the right people to help you bring those characteristics out, because these gifts, quote unquote, could also very easily be destructive forces. So that's the thing with, like, I remember one of the key turning points is I was in a peer group, and it was, like, whatever the intentions were, like it was always a very difficult meeting, like you just always pushing the envelope for more. No matter what you achieved, it's never enough. There's always more. And I remember just flying back from one of the meetings on a plane, and it was almost empty, and I'm in the back of the plane, and I'm just sobbing my eyes out, like, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, wait a minute, whose life am I living here? I'm living somebody else's idea of what this business should be. And it just, from that point, I started thinking about what I wanted, what my values were. And it literally just, it was just one of those things. I can't say what motivated, like, I really had to get down to the bottom before the light went off. And, again, failure, however you want to call it, those are if you're open to it, but it crushes a lot of people. Like, that's why, what is it, like 80% of the businesses that start fail the first year, and then the ones that make it 5 years, 80% of those fail. It's so hard to do this, and you just have to have all the right things and the right people and your mindset, and it's a constant struggle. So, like, I mean, you can look at those things and sure say, like, I have self-awareness, but, like, man, there's been a lot of people that have helped me get to that point, and it's still a daily fight to go, oh, wait a minute, that's me. Oh, wait a minute, the root of that problem is me. I got to fix me. And then sometimes you wind up gaslighting yourself. You're like, well, wait a minute. No, when are other people accountable for their actions? That's not your fault, buddy. So there's a curse to self-awareness too. It's like you start gaslighting yourself into, like, everything can't be my problem. It's like,
there must be something else going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you open yourself up when that's another challenge with this is when you start. This is why when you asked me to do this, like, I'm 100% ready to get on and talk to anybody who wants to be open and vulnerable about this kind of stuff, because I know so many people are struggling with it. And if one person hears it and it helps them, it's like, it's worth the time to do it. And so you by being vulnerable, you put yourself in a position to be taken advantage of, because there are people who know how to manipulate people like us very easily, because we're always, I'm an empath to, like, the nth degree. I feel other people's feelings. I can sense when somebody's really struggling, and I take that burden on myself. Well, you can only do that so many times before it crushes you too. So you've got to have people who help and protect you along the way. And sometimes that doesn't happen, and people get taken advantage, and that's how they lose businesses or families or all this stuff. So it's a lot. It's definitely a lot, but you have to be willing to talk about feelings and figuring out a path to get better.
Yeah, I think I remember you talking about that. It's so true that one wants to be vulnerable, but there are so many people out there that could sort of potentially take advantage. And it's just really being able to trust people, and that vulnerability doesn't come easy. So when you do kind of open up, you want to make sure that there's trust in the person on the other side.
I mean, you take a lot on the chin from that. You definitely have to develop some type of a thick skin along the way. And that's the really the art of this, is how to stay authentic without letting the world destroy you when you're vulnerable. Like that takes a lot of mental toughness. And there are days when I just don't have it. Like I just have to insulate myself, and I'm an introvert by nature. I struggle to be around people. Like you know, people say, well, we see you talk all the time, you speak in front of crowds, you do these types of things. You're not an introvert. And it's like, it takes all the energy in the world to stand up in front of an audience and bare your soul and answer questions, and just not have all the answers. Cause then people start looking at you like, well, you seem pretty smart. And it's like, no, I'm not smart. I'm interested in learning about the gifts I have and talking about them to maybe inspire people. But like, there's so much more that I don't know than I do. And there's people who are willing to attack you for that. And it takes a lot of energy to do that. So if you're not good at maintaining your energy, that's another thing. You can get really sick. You can go into these depression mode. So I struggle with a lot of that too.
I'm curious, Eric, how do you maintain that energy? What do you do? I mean, after talks, those kind of things, how do you keep your energy levels up?
A lot of shutting my phone off at night and, diving into books or, a good TV show. Like right now I'm obsessed with Ted Lasso because there's so much good lessons from that. Like I would just love to live in that world for a little while. But you have to, this is one of the things working with Rob and Gino is like one of the 10 disciplines they teach is you have to say no a lot. Yeah. And that's hard for people who want to help other people to just come in and say, no, I can't. I just can't. And that's understanding how much you have to give in the tank. And, the more you do this kind of stuff, the more people are going to gravitate towards you and want more things from you. And you're like, oh, I wish I had a 24/7 tank, but I don't.
Yeah. And are there a few of those 10 disciplines that you've integrated into your life from Rob and Gino that you're sticking to?
Sure. Oh yeah, and it's a constant thing too. It's interesting because, you look at it and it's not one of these things. It's kind of like, I kind of liken it to IT security. A lot of people think, well, if we do these things, then security is a checklist. It's done. We don't have to worry about it anymore. The 10 disciplines are just a constant thing you have to manage and be aware of, like 10-year thinking and time for stillness, not doing $25 an hour work. And that means is like, know where your value is and don't get stuck in the stuff that other people could do just as well or better than you. Managing your time, everything's in one place. Organize yourself before you go to bed so that your next day's set up for success. And, sure, we'd all like to say, well, yeah, I'm hitting it all in all 10 areas. And every day there's like an area where I'm just falling off the cliff on. It's like, I gotta pull myself back, and there's a discipline to it. You just have to, and visionary people are not known for discipline.
I love that analogy, comparing it to IT, because you're right. It's like, it feels like things are changing all the time in the tech space, and you got to just kind of keep up. And yeah, same. I think with those disciplines, I know since I spoke to Robert or read the book, I sort of started down that journey, and I try and keep up, but I think, I haven't done that, or I've fallen out of practice with this, or I haven't said no enough. And thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it, because as you say, our time is valuable. And I hope this message and the time you spend here does get to the right people, because I think it is so important for business owners and leaders to work on, I think, the mental health side. And I think you've spoken about that, and health in general. And these are such important things.
I think everybody needs a therapist. That's my personal opinion, is that everybody could benefit from therapy. And it's just like a doctor. You have to work to find the right therapy relationship, because just because you go doesn't mean you're going to get the right therapist out of the gate. Like I had to go through a bunch of them before I found my first good one. And it's not about taking drug, like if there's truly like an issue that needs medication, that's a small percentage of what we're talking about from a mental health perspective. Like I'm not on any medication, because the stuff that I deal with is not like it's not like there's wiring. Well, this is just the way my brain is. I have to learn to control it. But I think we're too quick these days, because like a lot of entrepreneurs have ADHD, ADD, OCD, all these things. Like I'm
What are those 3-letter acronyms?
and people want to like a quick answer and like, well, let's just medicate it away. And it's like, well, I don't want to dull my power. I just want to learn how to use it for good and harness it.
Yeah.
And then that's when it's like, okay, well, that's going to require work. And then people are like, oh, just give me a pill. And it's like, no, you can't, you don't have to work on yourself.
Yeah, you got to work on yourself. So what's a couple of pieces of advice you'd give to business owners right now?
Well, the one of the things that I've learned is there are certain things you can't share with anybody you work with. Like there's a line of understanding that unless you're the entrepreneur in the business, like people can sympathize or empathize and they can nod and say, oh, I understand. But if they haven't lived through it, they really don't truly understand what it's like to be a day in the life or walk in your shoes. Try and find somebody else who's, kind of either gone through it. Like I remember talking, and there was a book or something in one of the peer groups. They were talking about seek out people who have done what you want to do or been where you want to be, and just try to befriend them and offer some value, but in return then try to learn from them of what they did. So that's one thing, like, who you allow, you're the sum of the 5 people you hang
Yes.
with, the average of that. That's very, very true. Like really look at who you're spending time with, because that will affect how you vibrate and how your energy levels are. And then I would strongly encourage anybody who owns a business or is in leadership, you need a therapist. That saved my life, having a coach that knew how to push the right buttons without pushing me over the edge. I'm 100% convinced that I would not be here if I wouldn't have gone to therapy. Like I'm not saying I would have been suicidal, but there would have been a tipping point at some point that would have not made me here, whether it was a health event or some other, just doing something ridiculous. Therapy saved my life from that perspective. And I know how hard it is. And, we're in turbulent times and it's not going to get any easier. There's work going on. Economy's always an issue. People are different now than they were in 2019, before the pandemic. Like people have changed fundamentally forever. The pandemic did a number on us psychologically, and people are now used to being away from people more than they are together. And as an introvert, humans are still social creatures, and when you remove that element, things start to change fundamentally. And we've seen that now. It's so much different dealing with recruiting and hiring and the human resources aspect than it was even 5 years ago. That's another challenge. And business leaders were not built for that. Like there's no class you went to for human psychology and dealing with all this. So having somebody who's good in therapy to help guide you through the really dark times, that would be my strong advice, because people like us tend to also have addictive personalities. And so whether it's alcohol or drugs or other forms of trying to alleviate that pain, we are more exposed to that kind of behavior. So having somebody in your circles that can help you stay away from that stuff and figure it out is definitely a key piece.
And to be clear, you had a coach. It was Doug Diamond, right? You actually developed a really good relationship with Doug. and he encouraged you to seek out a therapist over a period of time. But
and he shared his journey as well. So like, he wasn't just saying you need a therapist. He says, I went through it. Here's how it helped me. And, again, bringing that the human element of it is so important in coaching, is being relatable and saying, I know what you're going through and I went through it. And here's how there's no good outcome for this if you don't get professional help, and there's no shame in it. That's the Gen X part, right? Like overcoming that whole stigma of therapy means you're weak. It's like, it takes a strong person to go and just deconstruct their whole belief system and, all deal with your trauma and all of that. Like, it's so much stronger you have to be to do that than to just give into it. It's easy to just give in. Anybody can do that.
One last question. The show's called The Freedom Experience. What does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from a human perspective, being able to be yourself authentically, and then having enough resources, when you look at Maslow's pyramid, right?
Yeah.
To get to the first 2 layers, to get to that love and belonging. And then if you're so inclined to climb the pyramid, like not everybody wants, but just to at least get to that love and belonging part, to have what you need at the bottom level so your basic stuff is taken care of. Once you start getting in the middle and top layers, I think that's where freedom comes. Compensation taken care of.
Eric, I'm very grateful for you coming on today and sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.